Hey guys, this is Teleth. Today I wanted to talk about character balance and good class design. Character balance can be summarized by the phrase power versus utility. I'm not the first person to say that. Someone on the forums did. I think it was Ryan. Sorry if I got that wrong. But yeah, power versus utility. Utility includes pretty much every positive trait that isn't damage, like range, survivability, combo potential, and the like. If an attack has more utility, then it should deal less damage, and if an attack has little or no utility, then it should deal a lot more. The other important facet of character balance is the base. You need a foundation from which to build your new classes. Balance is relative, so you need to have an anchor to keep everything in perspective. So how do you go about balancing a game like Grand Chase? Well, first you need to define an anchor. I believe that for the first job for all classes in a 1v1 setting should be the foundation for balance, and here's why. I believe that every first job from LSCs to Jhin is perfectly balanced in relationship to one another. This is because every class is unique in its functions compared to the other ones. LSCs does not shoot arrows better or worse than Lyre, and Jhin does not transform into a wolf better than Ryan. Ronan doesn't teleport better than Arme. All of their functions and abilities are completely unique and can't be compared to each other. Elysis doesn't counter Arme's fireballs with her own ranged attack. Instead, she must use her own strengths to overcome her opponent. And Arme can't counter Elysis' melee prowess with her own. She must use her own abilities to win. This is perfect balance. No class does X better than another because almost every other class doesn't even have X to begin with. Of course, this is only true if the attack power on all classes is scaled correctly. But for the most part it is. There are some exceptions like reverse gravity or arrow rain. But, those are pretty easily fixed. I do want to clarify the difference between a class advantage and a class imbalance. In every class-based game, certain classes have advantages over others. That's the point of a class-based game. It's that each class has their own abilities, not shared by anyone else. So advantages are inevitable, but neither unfair or impossible to overcome. Here's an example. Thief has a class advantage over Knight. I think I'm qualified to say that, having played both classes extensively. Thief's strength is controlling close-range combat. Knight is a melee class, and relies on its dash attack to deal a lot of damage. Thief neatly counters Knight's dash attack with its strong close-range combat abilities. But Knight is certainly not helpless against the Thief. Knight has a reliable combo, a powerful auto, and a grab to rival Thief's own. Knight is capable of playing Thief's game, though with the advantage of lesser mobility. Or the disadvantage, sorry. And Thief is just as capable of playing Knight's game in response, with its own combo, the 1-bar, and the running speed. Although classes have their strengths and weaknesses, they're all capable of fighting in ways that don't complement them. And this really marks the difference between a good player and a great player, is the ability to play unusually, and the ability to overcome opponents when they're at a disadvantage. Moving on. Imbalance occurs when classes have functional overlap with each other, and the principle of power versus utility is not applied. I hope I don't sound too much like a textbook throwing vocabulary words at you. Hopefully I'm not as boring, at least. I'm going to use Elysis as my example because it's the character I have the most experience with. Skipping Spear for the moment, we'll come back to that later. Compare Knight to pre-balance patch Swordmaster, before it got, the stupid overpowered 1-bar. What does Swordmaster have that Knight does not? Well, a giant frickin' sword, for one. This is functional overlap. These are both melee classes who share many of the same functions as the other, in their dash attack, in their aerial attack, in their playstyle. One of those functions is melee range. Swordmaster has significantly larger melee range than Knight. Therefore, it must have some downside related to power or to utility of another function. Which is to say that some other aspect is worse off than Knight's, in exchange for the ability to have more range. And it does. Swordmaster is not capable of dealing damage as rapidly as Knight is. Or wasn't. With the new balance patch, that's not the case. Ideally, post-balance patch, Swordmaster and Knight are in perfect balance with one another. In exchange for range, Swordmaster loses its ability to damage rapidly. Enter Savior. Savior is horribly overpowered in relation to Knight. Savior gains 4 or 5 functions that Knight does not have at 0 downside. It has a second aerial attack, a shorter grab, a tighter 1-bar, a faster dash attack, and the down Z drop. Oh, and the backstep. So that makes 6. And for all of that utility, Savior pays absolutely nothing. It retains all of the abilities of Knight, along with all of the new functions. So how do you balance something like Savior? Well, we need to apply the power versus utility principle to the class, and we want to do so in a way that keeps the class fun, reliable, and varied in relation to its predecessors. So we don't want just a Knight clone. We also want to keep it as simple as possible, since suggestions easier to implement are more likely to be considered by the game developers. Haha. We can start by removing every launcher attack that was added during the balance patch. That was stupid. Completely unnecessary buff, made Savior even easier to play. So that includes the 1-bar launcher, the recovery attack launcher, the combo attack launcher. I don't think the 3rd bar launched. I don't remember. I don't play Savior very often. But yeah, the launcher makes it absurdly easy for Savior to grab, and that's the class that already has one of the easiest and most effective grabs in the entire game. With the launchers gone, the majority of Savior's moveset knocks opponents down and away. And this is almost perfect, but we need to fix 2 more things. First is the aerial attacks. Their damage should probably be around 2/3 the damage of Knight's aerial attack, maybe even a little less. With 2 aerial attacks, Savior is more likely to hit with 1, but less likely to hit with 2. So we need to compensate for that. Last step. We need to restrict Savior's focus, which is a concept I'll explain in a minute. The current state of Savior with these changes is that of a class focused on setting up grab combos by knocking her opponents far away off ledges. Then she follows up with her quick grab or dash attack. But there's a problem. Savior can be played exactly like Knight, to the same or even greater effect than Knight itself. We need to ensure that Savior's focus is on its own strengths by removing these auxiliary ones that it possesses by merit of being LSCs. Both dash attack damage and grab damage should be significantly reduced, arguably over 50% of what they currently are, to ensure that grab combos are Savior's primary method of dealing damage. Now, theoretically, this version of Savior is balanced, but all things need testing. This is especially true in a game like Grand Chase, which thrives on exploiting classes and game mechanics. Sorry, I'm kind of recovering from being sick, so hopefully I'm easy to understand. Moving on to class design. It's time for some more vocabulary words. Let's start with barrier of entry and skill ceiling. A barrier of entry is basically the level of knowledge necessary to play a class effectively. Knight has a barrier of entry because you need to know Flash Step in order to play it effectively. Mage has a low barrier of entry because the only knowledge you need is basic knowledge of specials and delay. Dancer has one of the highest barriers of entry in my opinion because you need a multitude of skills and foreknowledge in order to use that class well. You've got your half rocket, all of your different ring autos, melee autos. The biggest one is how to manipulate your stance changes in order to be effective. There's a lot to learning that class. The counterpart to a barrier of entry is skill ceiling. The skill ceiling is the maximum level to which you can take your technical skills with a class. And technical skills includes player techs like stepping or auto or aim guan, exploits like that, and also includes built-in techs like PK's JF system and the like. A well-designed class should have a low barrier of entry, but a very high skill ceiling. So it's easy to learn, but hard to master. Dark Assassin is a good example of this, even though I really hate Dark Assassin. It's boring to fight and boring to play in my opinion, but it is well designed in this aspect. Its style is unique and does not require much outside knowledge to play at all. And the ceiling for it is astronomical. I've really never seen a class that has so much to really learn for it. It's so high that 99% of DAs never even see it. Never even see just how far they can go. Almost done. The last two vocabulary words are focus and depth. Focus I mentioned before. Every class needs a focus, a specific strength or ability that they rely on in order to succeed. You can't have a class with a broad focus, or it envelops other classes' focuses, making them obsolete, like the current state of Savior does to Knight. Savior possesses its own abilities and completely overlaps and eclipses Knight's abilities, so Knight is obsolete. Why would you play Knight if you can play Savior? And then there's depth. Depth is the hardest one to explain, and I hope this makes sense. What you want in a class is, well, think about it like this. Picture a universal flowchart for a class depicting their options in any situation. When you take one option, another series of branches open up to you, and when you take one of those options, another series of branches open to you, and so on. The more options you have, the more series of paths you can take, and therefore the more depth your character has. So the more options your character has, just in general, the deeper your character goes. And classes with good depth are going to have hundreds and hundreds of options, and poorly designed classes are going to have 5 or 10 or less, which because I'm brought to the unholy overlord of bad classes, and that is Spear, Elisis's second job. Spear is the single worst designed class in the game, and this is coming from the guy who mains Elisis. I play all of our other classes, but I won't play Spear. Spear has no barrier of entry and no skill ceiling. There is no good at Spear, and there is no bad at Spear. There is only one level of skill for Spear, and it's Spear. Spear has no depth. Its flowchart, the universal flowchart I just mentioned, contains the same 4 options in any given situation, and they all loop back to the same place. You pretty much can do 4 different things at any time ever. That's awful. And what's Spear's focus? Range? Well, Swordmaster has that covered, and far, far better than Spear does. And I mean, there's a reason it's always skipped when we talk about the best of the best. It's just awful. Spear fails in every category of class design. No other class in the entire game needs more of a rework than Spear does. I mean, even the current Expo, as much as I loathe that class, it's not even half as bad as Spear is. Oh well. Well, that's about it. I suppose I should point out that this really isn't intended to bash COG for their lack of effort in the PvP department. Balance and design gets extremely difficult when there are as many classes as there are in Grand Chase, especially when the game is based upon players exploiting the classes in unexpected ways. It needs constant balancing and constant work, and there's really no end to it. So yeah, I think that's about it.